Hi friends, I'm Lauren, and I'll be sharing with you our my jigsaw part of the chapter 11, which is about language and literacy skills of dual language learners. This part is really interesting for me since I teach second grade in Spanish to mostly Mexican American or Mexican students. Some are from El Salvador, and I realize that this situation is very common for many teachers with students from so many different countries. So to jump into it, our focus here, the chapter begins with a really common situation of a classroom with students from at least 4 different countries. They've had different amounts of time living in this country, and they have different language backgrounds. The teacher is concerned with how to best serve them. Other languages other than English are spoken in more than 20% of the US households, 28% actually here in Colorado, and with Spanish being the most common. When we talk about levels of acculturation, we're talking about how long the families have been here and how much they've integrated into the dominant US culture. So, and when we talk about dual language learners, there are actually 2 different kinds that we are discussing as well. One is a simultaneous bilingual, and those are kids who have generally been exposed to 2 or more languages since birth. And then we're also talking about sequential bilinguals, and those are children introduced to a second language around the age of 3. So that's our focus. The book starts to get into implications. Basically, there's a huge achievement gap that persists between dual language learners and monolingual English peers. There's different reasons for this. A couple that they mention are higher incidence of poverty, lower levels of parental education, marginalization within the dominant culture, low participation in preschool programs, and also simply a poor fit regarding the instructional needs of the child and what's available. So most preschools are in English with little instructional differentiation, so it's a sink or swim approach that these kids are facing. Bilingual instruction has been shown to improve school readiness. So there are a few different bilingual programs they mention are 50-50 or 90-10 models. That would be 50% in English, 50% in the home language, or 90% in the home language, 10% English. Another ways they mention this is that they can be one way where all the students in the classroom are share the home language, or 2-way, and that's where half of the kids speak English, only English, and half speak their target home language. There's really insufficient research to know the best approach. There's so much research about all these different kinds, and they haven't been able to say which this is specifically better. But they all mention that the bilingual staff leading lessons is a tactic that they all mention. So that's definitely an important part of them. And I put this little picture of this guy up here with the Peppa the Pig book in both languages, because research unequivocally shows the importance of intentionally supporting the acquisition of English and the home language in young children. And that's something I'm going to be discussing more further in my PowerPoint. Then the chapter begins to get into the recommended practices. The first one they mention is gathering both formal and informal data regarding the child's language proficiency in both languages. So they mentioned the parent report. The parents are like a huge resource for this, and they can gauge the child's current level of language exposure. There's a family language questionnaire in the appendix. They also mentioned testing for language proficiency, actual tests. So there's the pre-IDEA language proficiency test and the pre-language assessment scale, both of which are also in Spanish. But then I put 2 big stars of concern because there are concerns of validity that exist about language proficiency testing in early childhood. So multiple sources of data are really key. And then they put multiple sources in big, bold letters. Because, for these other languages, teachers, they can use interpreters to gather language samples, family interviews. They conduct their own observations. They can video record during play, at home. So all these multiple sources will be really key to finding out the language proficiency in both languages. And it's important that each language is assessed separately, and if possible by different assessors. The book mentions interlocutor sensitivity. sensitivity. So that's if a child, if there's only one assessor who speaks more than both, or who speaks both languages, it can really confuse the child to know which language they're supposed to be using with this adult. And so when possible, always actually, it should be different assessors in different language, each language separately. So that's what the book is saying as well, and other evidence. Another recommended practice it talks about is supporting the home language acquisition, which I'm super passionate about. Because I'll just jump down to this bold quote that I put in here, that rapid transitions to English-only environments, they can lead to a plateau or loss of children's first language, which can have detrimental social, cognitive, and linguistic consequences. That's what our book says, and that's what I've personally witnessed in my 3 years of teaching here in Colorado. So even though we know this, that the science shows us this, that they should not have this rapid transition to English-only environments, that's not what is practiced on a general scale. But we know this, and we're capable of making sure that the home language acquisition is continued. So I'll go back up to the top part where it says that when it is effective instruction, it capitalizes on and continues to strengthen the cognitive linguistic resources that the children already have stored in their first language. So when they already have it stored in their first language, then they'll be able to use it in the acquisition of a second language. But that's when the instruction is effective, and that's what we want. This can also lead to more executive control, where when they're able to do this and have both languages that they're learning in, can lead to higher planning, initiation of activity, working memory, inhibition, mental flexibility, and self-monitoring skills. These are all the different cognitive benefits of both languages of being acquired and developed. Also, it just mentions again, if the home language begins to plateau while they're in the earlier stages of English acquisition, they can fall behind developmentally and academically because of this challenge now to build new concept knowledge in either language. So if they don't have it in their home one, then when they're facing it in English, it can be even more challenging. That's why we definitely want both language acquisition. Another recommended practice that they mention is implementing culturally responsive practices. They mention 5 aspects of that. The first one being an awareness of one's own cultural limitations and judgments. This is huge. There's so many websites and books that teachers can go to where we can find out what our own biases are that we all have, learn our different limitations, and just have that as an awareness as you're going forward. The second one they mention is openness, appreciation, and respect for differences. The third one is viewing intercultural interactions as learning opportunities. So I see that really as a lens. When you're facing these different intercultural interactions, you can either face them as this is really challenging and something hard, but you can also face it as a really neat learning opportunity for everyone involved. And that's just coming to it with a different lens, which is really important. The fourth one they mention is the ability to use cultural resources and interventions. So whether that's bilingual staff, whether that's people from the community, different language and books, things like this, all kinds. There's so many different cultural resources available to us as teachers. Acknowledgement of integrity and value of all cultures is the fifth. And so basically what this boils down to is a lot of honesty and self-reflection. I feel like I put in this little comic strip, the crab says, "What do you think this lagoon needs the most?" The turtle says, "I think an overall sense of caring for each other, a genuine respect for the thoughts and opinions of others." And the crab says, "That's just stupid." "Point made," says the turtle. So just to sum it up, the chapter's appendix includes parental questionnaires with appropriate questions and other resources. They just keep mentioning interpreters and eye contact. Interpreters, of course, don't have to be educational professionals. They can be people of the community, as long as they're on the same page as the teacher regarding goals before the interpretation. So these are all culturally responsive practices that should be implemented. And then the chapter starts to get into universal strategies in differentiating instruction. I feel like they could have a whole other book on this, but they mention at least 7. So we'll dig into those. The first one being differentiating instruction based on English proficiency. So that starts also, like we said, having the families visit the programs, having that connection with the family. So that I accidentally put send him simple symbols. I meant to say send home simple symbols that you'll be using throughout the day. Symbols that they need to know that can be translated in their home language as well. That can include interpreters and having bilingual staff to support you. It also is adapting the level of English that the teachers are using to maximize comprehension and to help scaffold for the children. The second one they mentioned is incorporating second language scaffolding strategies. One that they mentioned is total physical response, TPR, and this is acting out the words or scenes. So it's actual physical coordination of the movement and language. So it's really cool. You can use it when you're opening a book and having new vocabulary words and acting those out. You can even use it as it's a whole body action. So you can use it if you have a classroom instruction of what to do next, the direction, and it's actually a song where you're acting out what to do next. That this total physical response makes that connection between the words, the language, and their bodies. So it's really neat. As well as the visual and graphic cues and real items. So having direct experience with physical objects to improve vocabulary learning. The example the book gave was hungry caterpillar, and bringing in different food objects that they're able to see the words and touch the different foods. Then a third strategy they mentioned are different read aloud strategies, which again, there's so many. The few that the book talked about was the dialogic reading, which is open-ended questions to elicit interaction. So where you're discussing all these different parts of the book with the children through these open-ended questions. Book walkthroughs. So it's kind of like a picture, I call them a picture walk when we do them at school. But discussing the book by looking at the pictures, and it's making a lot of different predictions about what they're thinking is happening and what's going to happen. And then they also mentioned repeated readings of books that the children are interested in and that they're learning with. So those are the first three. They continue on. The fourth one they mentioned is systemic vocabulary instruction. So this is when you can have an extension activities that embed target vocabulary into other activities. So if you're working on a science lesson with different vocabulary, use it in the art lesson as well. Use that science vocabulary and put it into the art one. That includes word walls, which can even also include pictures, vocabulary preview and review. So using that different words with pictures, with games, reviewing the vocabulary, really even before they're getting into it in a text, reviewing it with them. That includes developmentally appropriate definitions. So explaining to them what it actually means, and the strategic use of questions to foster discussions of vocabulary. So again, we're going back to those open questions that really engage them to talk about it. The fifth one they mentioned is incorporating a child's native language. So you have bilingual staff that actually lead the group activities or small group activities as well in the child's native language. That also includes teaching home language vocabulary that is relevant, that relates to what you're doing. So you can have that side by side. You can have it both the same word in English or in their home language. And that leads into the native language bridging, which is key vocabulary in their home language, the definitions in their native language. That includes cognates. Cognates are words that have the same etymology or different, they sound really similar and they have the same meaning. So Spanish and English, for example, have quite a few. French and English for French and Spanish, and cognates definitely aren't for all the languages, but you want to teach them when they exist. The sixth strategy they mentioned is encouraging family book reading or book walkthroughs in the child's native language. So the book says that storybook reading in the home language was found to improve English vocabulary acquisition over reading the same books in only English at home. So it's really important that they are reading at home in their native language. And also it mentions making books of pictures of them in the family that they can read at home. So that's also really helps. The seventh one I mentioned is assessing and progress monitoring in more than one language. So you need to assess all languages to better understand the overall language and literacy development. that includes all the multiple sources we discussed: parent reports, informal, recorded play, story retells, all kinds. So you're really assessing both languages in multiple ways. So those are the 7 strategies they really get into. It's interesting when they get into intensive instruction for tier 2 and 3. The book actually says there's not enough research for tier 2 and 3 interventions with dual language learners. And the short section. And this is a problem, issue that I face on a daily basis. And that's why I put this picture here of this link with a question mark that's kind of broken, because at this point, the book also mentions that really what it boils down to at this point are small group instruction that focuses on the language development, on vocabulary, on phonological and print awareness, that focuses on all these specific pieces. And that's really what I've been seeing and doing, and what I know of my peers doing as well. But and having effective instructional scaffolds, like they have to have scaffolds in place to be reaching into these tier 2 and 3 interventions. But I think it's really interesting that our book says there's not enough research. And I even spoke to my bilingual speech language pathologist from 2 years ago about this, and she said, honestly, it's just the situations vary so widely, and there's so many differences that it's really hard to get that this is the best practice published, because the situations vary so widely. So it's interesting. I feel like we're building the bridge as we walk it, as an article that I read about it. So yeah, you just have to keep trying, and definitely as a team. It's a lot of teamwork about that, I feel like, regarding the family, other staff members in the school, etc. Then the book mentions special education referral and put a big warning, proceed with caution sign right there, because most assessment tools, as the book says, were primarily normed on monolingual students, and they'll need to be interpreted with caution. Because the dual language learners generally score lower, evaluation teams need multiple sources of information about the child's development. We know that being bilingual does not cause more delays than being monolingual. So you just have to keep all that in mind as you're seeking the special education referral. There's definitely statistics of too many dual language learners being referred to special education. There's also statistics and my real life examples of kids who really do need the special education support, and for many reasons the system are having a hard time getting it. So I think the most important, another important piece here, I'm just going to keep stressing this system, it's important for teachers to reassure families that no matter where their child is developmentally, it's so appropriate and necessary for them to continue speaking the native language with the child at home. And then I jump into my lesson example. Let's say the targeted skill is writing letters, especially those in the child's name. So the universal tier of how I teach this would be a whole group book walkthrough, pausing at the keyword and talking through the letters, talking through the meaning of it, looking at the picture involved with it, adding this word to the word wall with the letters, with a picture, and also having a total physical response activity with it. So you're acting out the word before you're writing it. You look at it in the book, you talk about it, you ask questions, look at the letters, and then you have the total physical response to accompany it. The next tier, targeted tier 2, would be the native language bridging in a small group with the child that works with the word in the pictures or words in pictures, including the native language definitions, the native language words that would accompany that vocabulary. Also, that would include, the targeted tier would include the bilingual staff-led small group game with the letters of that word or different words, but having that bilingual access in their native language. And then the third individualized tier would be, again, having the bilingual staff-led, when possible, 100%, so awesome when you can have that. When they had the bilingual staff-led phonological and print awareness interactive iPad lessons that my Spanish language interventionist teacher had made for them in their native language. And then the child was able to access that after the first 2 tiers, and then go step into that 3rd tier and access that by themselves or with a teaching with an adult as well. That was so helpful because they could really, it was made specifically for them with the iPad. So it was really neat. The other individualized tier that be a storybook with the family pictures for that child, made for the school and home with that word and the name in both their native language and in English. And that would be another possible action for that tier. Then I jump into our references, and I added, besides our book, all these different links. And I feel like, and honestly, this is just a fraction, a tiny fraction of everything that's available about this. Just some neat websites that I've been using, and that's neat to, just as an introduction also to all of this. I just found this last one, which is a dual language learner national demographic profile, and it goes state by state. So it's really cool because you can actually see the facts as of last year regarding all the demographics. And this is it, chapter 11. I'm open to all kinds of questions. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this topic, and I hope you are as well.